Hello and welcome again. This is another edition of On the Barricades, your favorite Eastern European political show on the internet. And I'm Bojan Stanislavski, I'm your host, and Maria Chernat, who's here, is the co-host of the show. Hello, Maria.
Hello.
And we say hello again to Stanislav Byshok, who is our special guest. And I explained everything about him and about the context of our discussion in the first part of the program. So please, if you haven't seen the first part, go ahead and see the first part in order to get everything, all of the insightful comments from our guest. We're talking about Russia, Ukraine, we're talking about Eastern Europe, and also the global situation that is shaping up as an outcome of the meetings that occurred 2 weeks ago in Geneva and in Vienna between Russia and America, between Russia and NATO and the OSCE and so on and so forth. And of course, afterwards, between Blinken and Lavrov. But in this segment, I'd like to begin by discussing the sanctions, because we spoke about like other elements that are sort of shaping up the dynamic between America and Russia today. But let's focus for a while on the sanctions, because it seems like there's a lot of misunderstanding. On the one hand, many people consider sanctions as something that is just like a small, a punishment. Like you can just, if the kid doesn't behave, you can send them to, I don't know, stand for 5 minutes in the corner of your room or kitchen or something, right? So that's how sanctions are perceived by the, I would say, naive part of the public opinion. Then there are, some people who sort of feel that sanctions, they should be used more often in order to prevent hot war. And of course, I am all for preventing a hot war, but I don't think that sanctions are really an instrument that necessarily actually helps the situation. I mean, does actually prevent a hot war. Sometimes it could accelerate preparations for such a hot war. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, but the major misunderstanding here is that there is a widespread belief that Russia could be strangled by those sanctions. And once the Russian people live bad enough, they will turn against Putin and other evil, people in the in the Russian administration. They will take them down, and afterwards they will invite the West, and Russia will thrive, and everything's going to be great. So obviously this is not the case, but I'm wondering, like, can Russia really be impressed anymore by being threatened with sanctions? Because what sanctions are actually left to be introduced anymore? I mean, there could be some sanctions against the sovereign debt, maybe, but most of the debt isn't in dollars anymore. I mean, Russian sovereign debt. Then there could be this SWIFT detachment. This is like they're going to detach Russia from SWIFT. Well, guess what? If you had done that in 2014, perhaps that would have made sense. But now it doesn't make much sense because Russia is prepared for this. They have been developing their own interbanking system. They have been developing their own credit card and debit card systems. So, they're just going to use this now. So please go ahead, Stanislav, and tell me, what do you think about this sanction madness that is playing itself out?
Well, sanction madness. Once again, I'm an optimist here. Sanction madness is better than war madness. Okay, so
Okay, yeah.
if you're into
For the
sanctions, war
credit,
is
yes.
better than you have like a regular war. Of course, I mean sanctions matter. I mean, as a person who frequently visits grocery stores and whatnot, I mean, if comparing with 2013, let's say, I pay, I believe, like 40 or 50% more for the same package I buy. And in this case, I'm not buying like too much, and I know the prices. So the prices are, I mean, I know that the prices on food, they are growing everywhere, but not 50%, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
of course,
And also, you have to import your carrots from Israel now, so obviously it's a long way.
yeah,
Yeah.
but well, we have some homegrown
Yeah.
fruits and vegetables as well after the sanctions regime, so they are thriving. Uh, well, sanctions matter, but not in a way expected. So I'm thinking of no, perhaps with the exception of South Africa, but I'm not so sure that sanctions generally do not prompt regimes to change, but sanctions usually can prevent regimes from going on with certain policies. If we remember the initial the initial sanctions, which were imposed by the EU and the United States against Russia after the beginning of the Donbass conflict. Basically, at the time, it was believed that Russia, or pro-Russian, let's say, breakaway republics and rebels, etc., they were aiming to go as far as Kiev, because they had really virtually no resistance from the regular army, because back in the day there was the regular army of Ukraine was in a bad shape, to put it mildly. But after the sanctions were introduced, this advance of pro-Russian rebels just abruptly stopped.
Mhm.
So, and I'm not sure it's a coincidence. I'm not sure it is. So, in this case, I mean, if we presume that the general idea in the Kremlin was, or some of the ideas was to go as far as the Dnieper River and to, let's say, to capture Kiev, so it never happened. And I guess
Right.
it's hmm?
Yeah,
So
please finish your
in this
thought.
case, so sanctions really worked if it was the intention of Kremlin.
Okay, but so yeah, I get this. The sanctions did work at that point, and I think that this is precisely the difference in the situation, which the West doesn't seem to be able to wrap their head around, which is that Russia in 2014 was totally unprepared for most sanctions, including SWIFT detachment. That would cause probably a lot of problems to Russia back then. But since 2014, Russia has been preparing gradually and rather steadily, I would say, to more hostile actions on the part of the West against Russia, and has been strengthening its alliance with China. And I wonder whether the Russian administration or the Russian public, the Russian public for that matter, are impressed in any way when they hear, oh, Russia's going to pay if they, because this is the talk that we hear here. Russia's going to be made to pay once, they invade Ukraine, and which is going to happen, anytime soon. We keep hearing that from since early November. And does it produce any sort of reaction, or is it just like, the Russians shrug their shoulders and go like, okay, yeah.
Well, it's hard to impress Russians nowadays.
Okay.
Generally speaking, as a Russian, as a regular Russian citizen, I just know that I will pay even more for the same kind of goods I buy in markets. Okay, so it's not
Mhm.
about like breaking Russia, tearing Russia's economy apart. It's just making the lives of ordinary Russians uh,
Exactly.
yeah.
And
So
what is this supposed to achieve? Okay, the Russians are going to have more. They are going to have to endure more hardships. Like, how is this going to help solve the Ukrainian question? I have no idea. But this is. Let's just leave it to the imagination of the people that believe that sanctions are going to work some magic here. Let me go back to the question of international relations and the reshape that was produced by Russia in December by putting forward those ultimatums, some call it, or draft treaties and so on and so forth. So yeah, and also in connection to the sanctions, let's talk about Nord Stream 2 and the certification of Nord Stream 2 that is being delayed. Now, for all I know, Nord Stream 2 is already full of gas and is ready to basically deliver whatever amount is required. And the kind of deliberations around the certification of it, they seem to be something like a bureaucratic obstacle, which I think occurred right after Joe Biden actually lifted the sanctions on the companies that were constructing from the German side, constructing or doing something about this. I can't remember exactly about Nord Stream 2. He lifted the sanctions, but then suddenly the certification occurred. So it was like a concession to the Russians, but not to the full extent, I suppose. But then everybody seems to forget that Nord Stream 2 is not a Russian idea from the beginning. Because this is how it's presented. Russians have built this pipeline and they, I don't know, somehow teased the Germans into it. And now everybody's trembling before the Russians because they can blackmail everyone with their gas policies and so on and so forth, which is all BS. I don't want to go and deconstruct that like right now, maybe on some other occasion. But let's at least say for the record that Nord Stream 2 was originally a German idea. That was a German idea. And I think it's going to be looking very stupid if under the pressure of the Americans, the Germans are not able to carry out their own idea of having of importing gas from Russia. But I'm wondering, because this Nord Stream 2 thing seems to be actually splitting the West to some extent. I mean, especially when you see Europe, there are those countries which are still serious countries, despite the general crisis of leadership in Europe and in the world, I would say. But in Europe, it's particularly visible. But say the Franco-German part of the European Union, they kind of want to go ahead with the Nord Stream 2. They want to go ahead with settling the thing with Russia and Ukraine. They don't want to have any more conflicts, and in particular, they don't want to see any war playing itself out. And the prices of gas and everything. There are elections coming. This is a complicated situation for them, let alone for businesses in both of those countries. And then there's the part of Europe that I like to refer to as Britain-led. I mean, Britain and then all the Baltics, Poland, Romania, and all the kind of hawkish little states, except for Britain, which is not a little state, of course. They kind of want to go for war now. Let's just take down Russia immediately. And of course, this division
you should hear the talks in Romania. They are
Yeah.
exquisite. I should send some print screen to
Yeah,
you.
next time we're going to produce some memes about it.
Yes,
We're going to show them here.
they're exquisite.
But
the
look,
Romanians are a real threat. You should be worried.
Yeah, you should be really afraid of that. No, but like just do you think that this might have been one of the goals of the Russian diplomacy, perhaps, to sort of achieve this kind of splitting of opinions? That's why they perhaps pushed it to the brink with the draft treaties and their more assertive behavior. Is it something that is good for Russia? Is Russia going to be able perhaps to discuss on a bilateral basis with some of the governments of the European Union? Is this somehow better for Russia? I'm wondering, because what does the Russian media say about it? What is your opinion about it? And what is the policy of the administration, of course? Go ahead.
Well, generally speaking, I mean, I'm a frequent guest at Russian political talk shows, and the general idea by the hosts and by the majority of guests who are, like, say, fiercely patriotic, is that there is a chaos in the EU and they have stupid leaders, and they sort of,
which is not far from the truth, by the way, but that's not.
Yeah, but they, at least, I mean, there is a great anecdote between the freedom of speech in the USSR and in the United States. I mean, there was a dialogue, let's say, between President Nixon and Secretary General Brezhnev about the freedom of speech. And Nixon said, hey, I mean, every American citizen can come to the White House, shout that he hates President Nixon and America, and get away with it. And the General Secretary Brezhnev said, hi, we have the same thing in Moscow. Every Soviet citizen can come to Moscow, shout that he hates President Nixon, and get away with it. Okay, right. So I mean that's how it works until today, by the way, on the Russian media. So the general impression is that the Europeans don't know what they want, and they sort of make concessions to the United States, and by trying to stop the certification of Nord Stream 2 and whatnot, they sort of making worse for themselves, because they will have a cold winter, and some of them will freeze to death without the Russian gas. But generally speaking, yeah, I agree with you that Nord Stream 2 is not a Russian project. It's a joint German-Russian project, and it has to do with the need of Germany to have enough gas it needs to heat itself, right? So in this case, I mean, if we're speaking about this market, of course, if you have, let's say, 3 markets near your house, it's better to have to be able to buy from all 3 of them, not only just one market. Okay, so it doesn't mean that the Germans will get 100% of the gas they need from this Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So it's about diversification, right? So, and if the pipes that run through Ukraine, for example, if they were enough, and if they were let's say if Ukraine were a reliable, 100% reliable partner, of course, there would be no need for building this additional Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Okay, so in this case, I mean, those some experts, they speak about pipes instead of speaking about gas. I mean, it's about gas, not about pipes. Okay, so if Germany were so happy to be able to provide its citizens with its own home produced gas, there would be no need for these external supplies. Okay, so in this case, I mean, it's not whether or not Germany loves Russia more than the UK does. It's about gas. So but of course, I mean, those people who say that by pushing this project ahead, Russia wants to be to better its own image in the West. Of course, it wants, but that's how it works. It doesn't.
Yeah, and
It
what's
doesn't
wrong with it? Like wanting to have a better image.
yeah, of course, it's the basic idea of liberal international relations theory. Is that the more you trade, the more agreements you have with different countries, the more joint organizations you all part of, the less likely you will have difficulties between yourself. Okay, so in this case, I mean, there is nothing wrong with this Nord Stream 2, and indeed, I mean, that's in this regard, I'm on the side of the Kremlin, meaning that of course, if you don't want to buy our gas, you shouldn't. Okay, so that's how it works.
Right, and before I hand it over to you, Maria, and the media and stuff, I just wanted to also mention that there is another element of this narrative that you just mentioned, Stanislav, that Russia wants to sell gas to Germany and it wants to leverage Ukraine that way, or Poland for that matter, because it's also going through Poland, right? I mean the pipeline. So yeah, first of all, it's not about the infrastructure. It's really about the gas that Europe needs, and this has been shown by the conditions that are all around us here in Europe, in a sense that we had a relatively mild winter so far, and the gas reserves are so low, historically low. So all those tankers that were coming, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, that were coming from the US to save Europe because everything's going to be okay. Russians are not going to be blackmailing or threatening us here with anything. We've got the 40 tankers. They were first 20, now 40, whatever. Most of them actually went to Britain, which is outside the EU. So that's the first one. Second, while they were still on the road to Europe, while they haven't yet even approached the continent, there was this talk in the American media where experts and stuff were saying like, good, no problem, we're going to send those 40 ships there, but is anyone really counting on America providing gas to Europe and for Europe? Like, this is impossible. We simply don't have that much gas. So like, obviously, it speaks to the quality of the European leadership, but I think it also speaks to the question of departure from logical thinking. I mean, this is something that is really worrying me in terms of international politics, because sometimes you just you look at it and you go like, is there any adult in the room? With situations like that. So there's a lot to comment on about that, but please, Maria, over to you.
Well, this speaks a lot to the to the power of propaganda. My idea and the idea of other media theories that was not explained, probably not debated enough, is that unfortunately there is no match for Western propaganda. They do it, and they do it so well, and it is so seductive, and it is so efficient that no other power on the face of the world could be a match for that. And you should not underestimate the force of that. And I would just tell one thing. When the US and the NATO military bases were finally, the agreement was done, and the tanks, the actually military equipment came to Romania, there were people with flowers in the streets. Can you imagine?
Like during the First World War.
People, like, they truly believed, like Woodrow Wilson was acclaimed as a war hero at the peace conference in Paris. Not something like that, but still, people were cheering up. And there is a vast majority of Romanian population that still thinks that they buy into all that seductive propaganda, that the Americans are here for the people, that they want to impose a democratic system where everybody would thrive no matter how poor, that they are here to support democracy, the rule of law, and all the rest. They truly buy into that. Now, the Russians were never, ever able to accomplish something like that. I mean, if in Romania you would say to somebody that the Russian tanks are coming, they would go berserk. They would be hysterical. And the problem is, I would come back now to Ukraine. Don't you fear that maybe in Ukraine, I don't know what's the situation, but since you obviously studied because you wrote 2 books that I invite the readers to check up and read on Ukraine, don't you fear that maybe the Ukrainians buy into that propaganda just like us Romanians and really think that they are so much better off with the West and the NATO bases there, and they would live happily ever after, like at least the top 1% in the United States once the NATO bases are there? Because this is the real danger, that the minds of the people are being colonized.
Well, generally speaking, of course, the United States is attractive worldwide, and not only by its military might, because there are people who just don't care about military might, but we all watch American TV series and whatnot. So in this case, you do not need a minister of propaganda when you have Hollywood and Microsoft and Google and Apple. So in this case, so it's an unintended consequence of certain like economic advantages of the American project, so to speak. As for Ukraine, I mean, it's hard to say because I mean this conflict in Donbass, it claimed around 15,000 lives, and of course there are people in Ukraine proper, who lost some of their relatives or who have somebody who was injured during this conflict, who were in the military at the time. So to say that, well, I mean, but it was not the United States who sent them to Donbass, or at least they do not feel it that way. So in this case, the reality is that nowadays about, let's say, I mean, according to opinion polls, it's around 50%, maybe 60% of Ukrainians generally approve of joining NATO. I mean, it has something to do not only with Hollywood, but with Russia. Okay, so in this case, I mean, prior to 2014, I mean, the percentage was lower. It was like around 30% were pro-Western, pro-NATO, around like 40% were more pro-Russian or neutral, and also there were a lot of undecided people. Nowadays, the situation is, as we see, and even those people who are not staunchly anti-Russian, they are not necessarily pro-Russian. So, I mean, they just want maybe their country to be left alone because, I mean, despite the fact that they also consume all these talk shows in Ukraine, and in Ukrainian talk shows, when they speak about Russia, the let's say the space for conciliatory position towards Russia is much lower than the space towards pro-Ukrainian position in the Russian media. To that, I admit. I mean, that's truly the case. But once again, to be an advocate to Ukraine, it's not Russia who lost some territory to Ukraine, and it's not Russia who fights rebels supported by Ukraine. It's the opposite situation. So in this case, I'm a bit, let's say, I'm a bit less critical of Ukrainian, let's say, the Ukrainian government's information policy, even though I do not support it. I just understand why they do what they did, and I understand that Russia is nowadays, when discussing Ukraine on certain political talk shows, they also invite Ukrainian guests, and I mean Ukrainian, like staunchly Ukrainian anti-Russian, who just with a loud voice accusing Russia of invading Ukraine, annexation of Crimea, etc., etc. But in this case, I mean, Russia in a stronger position here. And in this case, I mean, surprisingly, but in this, when speaking about Ukraine and Russian relations, I mean, the room for different opinions is bigger in Russia than it is in Ukraine. But also, I mean, there is a certain element, of course, of make believe in Ukraine. I mean, the idea that, I mean, even during the Maidan protests or the Revolution of Dignity, I mean, there were a lot of people who really believed, who were not like radical nationalists or whatnot, who were like pro-European, like urban, middle class, creative class guys, who really believed that they will just in a couple of years they will join the European Union or the Schengen Agreement and whatnot. So they really believe that this document of association agreement, which then President Yanukovych failed to sign, it was really an agreement to join the European Union. I mean, I mean, people are people. They just believed in fairy tales. Then they believed that the West will eventually come to their aid, not just send them javelins and whatnot, but just come to their aid because they are attacked by Russia. But even the United States is very much reluctant to send their troops to fight. I mean, to say nothing. Well, military instructors are different, like different groups. They are not as they're not in danger of being sent to the front lines. So in this case, I mean, they're desperate because they thought that they would have some help. They thought that after overthrowing Yanukovych, who was not as evil and as dictatorial as they portrayed him, because
and not so pro-Russian either.
Yeah, back in the day, I mean, I remember I worked in Ukraine for about a year just prior to the Maidan events. It was so free, politically speaking. I mean, every party, every person could get elected anywhere. I mean, if you had a lot of money and connections, I mean, it was impossible for you not to be registered as a candidate running for anyone. Maybe if you just fail to collect any number of signatures, maybe in that case, but it would be a national scandal if you were not allowed to run. So back in the day, it was a country, it was a territory of freedom, and a lot of Russian political spin doctors, they were frequent guests in Ukraine because there was a lot of demand for Russian expertise, because in Russia the elections are much less competitive than they were and than they are in Ukraine. But nowadays it's more difficult for Russian specialists to come to Ukraine. But back in the day, I mean, it was better, but it's not fashionable nowadays in Ukraine to remember the pre-Maidan life, as being better than what they had now. But they claim that if not for the annexation of Crimea and for the war in Donbass, they would live like happily, like in Poland or I don't know where. So I mean, they blame Russian aggression for the failures of the post-Maidan governments to deliver on pro-European path.
Yes, and this is a thing I would say that the Americans and the Westerners are using, because when you have a population that is its vast majority pro-Western and actually buys into that, it's a major, I would say, advantage. But I would say it's also very unfortunate because, as it turns out, in Romania, were so happy to have all these things that were supposed to make us live happily ever after, but it never happened. And things like prosperity, sovereignty, democracy, they do not just happen just like that because you have two NATO military bases or join the European Union, and
Or
all of a sudden,
Coca-Cola, for that matter.
or Coca-Cola for that matter, and all of a sudden things are going to get better. Now, we end this second segment of our show where we discussed Ukraine, the situation, and as I said previously, we discussed it with somebody from Russia because it is very important to have rational debates with rational people, and I think it's the best way to reach a less um, violent in terms of discussions and
And less
paranoia.
emotional also. I mean,
Less
we should just
emotional,
be
yes,
rational about it, right? That's
of
Russian and
course.
Russian.
Exactly. Exactly. So, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed our show. If you did, please click subscribe. Go to our Patreon page and support us. It is the barricade. Patreon.com/the barricade. This is the place where you can find us, and you can become our Patreon. I invite you all to do that. And stay healthy, keep fighting, and we'll see you all next week.
thank you.
Thank you.